Hey y'all, it's Megan Leipitz-Seedlick from the Pamphleteer with Nashville Savvy, coming to you live from Nashville, Tennessee. And I'm coming off of special session, so get ready to go through a little bit of a deep dive into special session that went on all last week into the beginning of this week. So first up, I just want to give you a little bit of the lay of the land. And I was speaking to the producer of this before, and I was talking about how dark it feels sometimes in politics, man. There's so much stuff going on, and there's so much other stuff going on behind the scenes, and I mean, it's no secret that politics are dark, but I'm glad to be back into my regular schedule, off of the special session, done with a lot of the political grandstanding and hoopla that was happening, and I'm sure you saw some stuff on the television, but I'm going to give you a little bit more insight into what was happening from my perspective, being up there in person, and a little bit of a rundown on what we actually passed and what we actually didn't get through and why. So I'm going to just double check and make sure that I'm heard okay. Let's check my microphone. We're still working out the kinks here in at Nashville Savvy. Let's see. I think I'm good. I'll have to figure out later if I'm not good. So we started special session. You go up to the Hill. There's over 100 bills that are filed. Of course, there was a very narrow window of what could be brought forward. Democrats were obviously really upset that they weren't really able to bring forward any of the gun bills that they wanted to bring forward. But we also had some language in there to do with extreme risk protection orders and possibly some other mental health things that people were looking at. But that's not what happened. We only had 4 bills passed, y'all, which it depends on who you're talking to. Some people are really happy about that, and some people are like, most people feel like it was a giant waste of time. But let's quickly look at what bills got passed. We have HB 7012, which is also the companion bill of SB 7085, and this was the firearm locks bill. If you're following anything along, there was a firearm locks, safety locks bill where they basically codified something. Every year there's a tax break on safety locks and stuff like that. The state re-ups, but this also created a type of grant program where you could get safety lock covered for free if you're a gun owner. It also codified in the guidelines for teaching firearms classes that you have to have a safety course about safe storage. But of course, this was something that was already happening within gun classes. They just didn't have it officially in the code or the guidelines. So they kind of made sure that that was all in there to do with the safeties of locking up guns, which was, if you are living in Nashville, you do see a lot of stolen weapons. Now, does that come down to whether or not you're safety locking your gun at home? Like, no, but it was just one of those threads that we've seen perpetuated through the media, and then it was addressed in a sort of a way with this bill. Then we had HB 70, I think it's 7013, and then SB 7086. So when I'm saying 2 bill names, it's because the House and the Senate both have to pass the same bill for it to actually go all the way through and then end up on the governor's desk. So they have companion bills that get passed in both chambers. This one was to codify the governor's executive order. He issued an order after what happened on the tragedy of March 27th. Towards the end of General Assembly, he passed an executive order. It was order number 100, and it was to help establish a streamline in the Tennessee instant check system. So this instant check system that you use to do background checks on people when they're buying firearms, and the executive order was basically asking for this system to be updated within 72 hours of new information. Meaning if there's a court ruling or an arrest or something that's on your record, they want that to be updated within 72 hours. So if you try to go out and buy a gun, but you know that the system is updated, so people who have a new record, it's updated in the system. This got codified in law by passing these two bills. The next bill set that was passed was HB 7041 and SB 7088. Hold on one second. My cat is like making all these noises. I do have cats, y'all. I'm the Nashville cat lady now. So in this third bill, it would require the TBI to issue an annual report every December on human trafficking. And this was a big deal. This is actually one of the only bills, or actually the only bill that didn't get amended. It just passed through exactly the way that it was supposed to pass through from, like, well, the way that it was written originally. And this, when we were observing what was happening on the floor, the TBI policy director came out and he was like, hey, we already do all these reports. We don't need to have an annual report. And this, you know, basically came out and kind of made it seem like this is a useless bill. But we also heard testimony and heard from multiple legislators that actually there is no grand compilation of human trafficking information and data that, well, at least for the last 10 years, where there's a huge report that put it all in one place. And they really want to see this data on its face. Now, this human trafficking bill includes, obviously, sex trafficking, child sex trafficking, but some things that people forget about trafficking, there's labor trafficking. Human trafficking is a writ large. It's not just about children. It's not just about sex trafficking. It's also about labor trafficking. So this would be an all-encompassing report that will be submitted to the governor and the speakers of both chambers on December 1st of every single year. And the reason that they wanted this passed timely this special session and didn't want to just wait until General Assembly is because there are multiple legislators who are looking to tackle this issue of human trafficking across the state, and they want the data so that they could actually look at it and find where the weaknesses are and if they can bring any bills forward during General Assembly next year. So they wanted this to be passed during the special session so this report would be in by December and that they could make some moves next General Assembly when it comes to human trafficking in the state. So that was a really big win. If you know the Tennessee Faith and Freedom Coalition, they're the ones who really pushed for this, and it's a big win for them. Then the last bill was HB 7070, SB 7089. This, of course, was the bill that paid for the whole special session. You know, they have to pass a fiscal note being like, yeah, we're going to pay for special session. An amendment was tacked onto this that also added some other information. And hold on one second. I'm going to check my audio here. Does that help? Is my audio? Check 1, 2. I'm talking to my editor or my producer right now. Okay, cool. So we've got this last bill that basically covered the cost of special session, but an amendment was added that also added some fiscal notes, $10 million in school safety grants for K through 12 schools, but also $30 million in public safety grants for post-secondary schools, so different collegiate schools and stuff like that. $50 million for the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse, and I haven't yet delved too deeply into what all this means. I have a feeling that it might be a little bit more interesting than I've given enough. I haven't had the time to deep dive into it yet, but I am talking to some policy experts, especially when it comes to TennCare and Medicaid, seeing what they're doing with the mental health and some of the federal money that they might have tacked onto this bill that they passed. So those are 4 bills that passed through special session. Doesn't seem too crazy, right? But of course, that's not all that happened during special session. So the whole entire time we saw a lot of, what would I call it? I don't want to just say grandstanding. There is a real tragedy that happened here in Tennessee, in Nashville area. And there's real pain and real strife and real victims, obviously. And some people wanted different solutions or their politicians to do different things to address this problem based off of the fact that we had this awful tragedy, the school shooting, the massacre happened at Covenant. So we saw protesting, we saw people starting to create like special interest groups, nonprofits, people putting things together just to all come together for this special session. Of course, we also saw the strife amongst conservatives across the state. We saw the SEC, the leaders of the Tennessee GOP calling to not do this special session. We saw some other legislators also ask the governor to prayerfully reconsider calling this special session and just waiting until and addressing some of this stuff next year. And of course, what it really gave was a grand stage to continue what basically happened towards the end of General Assembly, which was the Justin Jones, Justin Pearson, Gloria Johnson national attention narrative. And that's what this special session really laid out a stage for, was a lot more press coverage. I mean, we had New York Times people here, we had CNN people here, but this time around they also had a lot, many more troopers up there making sure everybody was safe. I know that towards the end of General Assembly, there were multiple legislators being threatened, their lives being threatened, and it was a scary time. So being up there myself, I did feel very safe. I was a little bit weary before. I did not want to go up there, y'all, because I don't feed off of that type of energy at all. But I felt very safe up there simply because we actually had the state troopers' presence, and obviously they were extra cautious and conscientious of what was going on, just because it was such a big deal. So what I'm going to play now, before we get into some of the behind the scenes politics of it, I'm going to play a little bit of a video to demonstrate like what it was like up there again, just like during General Assembly. So we're going to watch Justin Pearson here. So the gentleman in the glasses that you see pushed around is the Speaker Cameron Sexton. And Justin Pearson and Justin Jones were, surrounding him as he was trying to leave the session floor. And you can also hear the people in the gallery shouting. Now you have Leader Lamberth, who was trying to talk Justin Pearson down. So this was just one of many little incidents that happened, and honestly, I stayed away from it. I wanted to know what was happening more on the political front of what bills they were going to push through. I'm always weary of legislation. You probably have noticed it when I cover Metro City Council. I'm of the mind that less is more. Like we already don't follow, know what all the laws on the books even are. Sometimes they overlap, and it confuses people, especially when it comes to stuff that the police departments and stuff have to adhere to. And so I'm a less is more person when it comes to legislation. So I was looking down the list of 100 plus bills, I'm like, what are they sticking in here? So I was paying more attention to the political side, what they were actually going to pass and what was happening in the committees, and less on the grandstanding of whatever politics was happening for the national media attention. And the tit for tat that's been going on, there's obviously Justin Jones, Justin Pearson. Justin Jones got silenced. We're going to talk about the rules for a second. They passed a series of new rules in the House just for this special session. So they're not the rules that we usually use when we're conducting business up in the General Assembly, but they were rules to basically keep the galleries quiet, because we had a lot of disruptions at the end of General Assembly, and obviously we had a protest from the session, the House floor. We had a rule about getting off topic. So when you're called on to speak about a bill, you are only supposed to speak about the contents of that bill. You're not supposed to go off on some you're not supposed to go on your soapbox into some political tirade or whatever. And so that had very steep repercussions. So if you did it once, it was a warning. If you did it twice, you were silenced until the end of that day or something. And if you did it 3 times, you were silenced through the end of session. Now, it didn't mean that you couldn't vote on bills, but it did mean that you couldn't speak. You couldn't be given the time on the floor to speak about the bills. So Towards the end of this special session, Justin Jones, of course, violated this rule a number of times, and it's at the discretion of the speaker in a way. This time they tried to hone in what the guidelines were. Of course, the speaker is in charge, so he can ultimately make calls based off of however he wants to interpret what's going on the floor. And that's exactly what Justin Pearson said in defense of Justin Jones, is like, hey, you're being unfair with these rules, and now you've silenced Justin Jones. And then, of course, in protest, Justin Jones left the floor, and then the entire Democratic caucus followed him out in solidarity. And that was another move that was made as far as the political circus that's going on up there. We also saw fighting between the House and the Senate. Would I call it fighting? It's hold on, I'm trying to make sure my sound is still okay, guys. How are we doing? Is this okay? Okay. So when we're talking about the fighting that was happening between the House and the Senate, on the first day, I ended up getting some really good information about 4 bills that the Senate was planning on passing, and only passing the 4 bills. Now that's like journalist gold, because there's 100,000 ways that this General Assembly or special session can go. I don't know what way it's going to go. And so the information I got on the first day ended up being good information. They did end up only passing 4 bills. Okay. So that was a decision that was made over in the Senate. That was made by Senate leadership. And what happened was, I can't, on the record, I don't know anything that really happened as far as the leadership goes, but what was happening between the House and the Senate was the Senate just shut down all of their committees, okay? They shut down all their committees. They only put through the 4 bills. And then the House was still deliberating over a number of bills, all right? So the House was upset because the Senate was kind of already done with its business and only we're going to put through the 4 bills. The House is now in this charade of discussing all of these bills in ad nauseum, and meanwhile the Senate's kind of done with their business. Now, this went back and forth, and you saw different things happening as far as how the politicians themselves were trying to handle it, how they were trying to get it covered in the media. They're playing chicken with each other a little bit. Ultimately, in the end, on the last day, Gardenhire, who is a state senator, he is in charge of I think it's the Judiciary Committee. He was like, I'm not reopening my committee. So, and then a couple other chairmen were also like, we're not going to reopen our committee. And because of that, Senate basically closed out, sine die, done. We are only passing the 4 bills, and then the House had to just adhere to the 4 bills, and then we were done. It happened in a whirlwind because the Senate just was like, we are not doing anything else. We're just going to pass these 4 bills. So that's a little bit of what happened. We're diving deeper into all of the nuances of exactly what happened, but there's power struggle going on within the Senate. There's this power struggle going on between the House and the Senate, and then of course, I think the biggest takeaway from this, if I'm going to be completely blunt, is the biggest takeaway for me was that the House leadership looked really, really weak. People sometimes look to them as the backbone of the General Assembly, but this go around, they didn't look like the Senate looked like the backbone of the General Assembly, to be honest with you. So that's the biggest takeaway for me as far as a shift in political prowess, if I was going to make any judgment call there. But regardless, we're going to go into, that's a really, really long, short version of special session. I would say take everything that you see in the media with a grain of salt. I want to read to you, before we get to the next section here, I want to read to you a quote from, I was interviewing different people that were in different committee meetings up on the Hill in person. Not everybody was there, in support of gun laws or in support of mental health. Some people were up there because they were supporting conservative legislators, and they honestly didn't really want anything to be passed during a special session. They didn't want the reactionary legislation to be passed. They didn't want any of their constitutional rights to be violated. And so you got a lot in the media from very specific perspectives of who was up there and who was up there protesting and who was up there for what reasons. And there's a lot of other people who are up there who don't make the media, they don't make the cut when it comes to the narrative on the national or even on the local media news. So I'm going to read to you a quote from a woman who was actually in that committee meeting. If you didn't know, there was a committee meeting where it made national news because they kicked everybody out of the committee meeting, including some of the Covenant families. And they were very, very upset, obviously, and they were upset and crying, and this was a big news story. But some of the other people in that room that were also kicked out of that committee have a completely different perspective on what happened. So before I get into that, let's see. One of the women in the room, she was okay with going on record. Her name is Tess Robbins. Okay, she is an SEC member, and she's from Henry County. And when they got kicked out, she was kicked out of the room just like everybody else was, but she hadn't been doing anything to violate the rules. So this was her quote. She said, "When we were all kicked out of there, it was because people were disruptive. Before they got kicked out, they were cheering at times. And what gets me is they want gun laws, but they aren't even willing to follow the rules themselves. They were warned many times, and they were warned civilly. They were warned by the chairman and by the sergeant of arms very civilly. And this is not a game. This is not a sports arena." And she also said, they brought up their First Amendment rights, and I told them, you got us all kicked out and you took away my right to be in there and my right to be in there to listen. So this was very frustrating for people who were there as well. And this was, like I said, Tess Robbins, who was actually in the committee where everybody got kicked out. And just as much as there were people upset for their particular reasons, she was upset because, they were disruptive and got her kicked out. And, she wanted to be in there to listen, and she was following the rules, and she was very upset about the fact that other people were willing to just take away her right to be there by being disruptive and not following any of the rules. So that is something that and there's many other people like that who showed up. And of course, I'm sure there's many other people across the state who have differing opinions. Again, tragedy, seeing hurt families, sad families still grieving is awful, and I think that we can all come together and agree on that. It's just when it comes to calling special session, passing legislation, you're obviously going to see a clash about what policies are fitting depending on the perspective of each Tennessee civilian. So we're going to go to our next section, Local Corner. We got some new music, guys. So we're going to transition. Local Corner. Yay! I hope you guys like it. I'm totally digging it. Of course, our local corner is usually something I like, something that's more cultural or something that's just super interesting that's from around here in Nashville. And I'm always bopping around talking to people, getting invited to interesting things, and I love to share different things. So this week I was talking to somebody who was visiting Nashville, and they were looking for something to do. They kind of got sick of downtown. Now, these are probably, I would say, middle-aged, maybe, I don't want to put numbers on these people, maybe in their 60s, late 50s, early 60s. And they were out having a good time. They were visiting Nashville. And what they ended up getting sick of was how noisy and loud downtown was, but they still wanted the ambiance and the experience of having that, Nashville country experience, but just not with all the downtown craziness. They came across over to East Nashville. I was chatting with them with a couple other people, and it happened to be Tuesday. And I don't know if you guys know about this, but we're going to play a video in a second, but there's something that happens every Tuesday over here on Gallatin, and it's called the Honky Tonk Tuesday Nights at the American Legion. And if you don't know about this, I feel like it's like a best kept secret. I shouldn't be giving it away, but It's amazing. Not only is it amazing, it brings everybody together. It's honky tonk, it's two-stepping, it's having a good time, it's having a beer with buddies. It's just a really great every week event that is held over here at the American Legion. And what I was really like really discovering once I was talking about it with these people who were visiting from out of town and the bartender I was talking to is that everybody goes to this. Like there is no, it's like everybody's welcome here sign is I have I have groups like groups, Christian groups of friends who will plan to go and dance at the American Legion. There are like bikers who go to the American Legion. There are old, young, barefoot babies dancing around. There is no discrimination as to who is welcome into this event. So you should check out the American Legion. I'm going to play a little bit of a video of the style. Ooh, go ahead.
Well, I got the honky tonk blues.
Oh, oh, that's the vibe. I mean, that's of course. I believe that's the Cowpokes, and I do believe that they do play down at Roberts on downtown Nashville. If you know Roberts, and you understand why that's a very very similar vibe as far as that old honky tonk feel, but also the two stepping and the dancing. And like I said, everybody is always welcome in there. You never, all kinds are welcome in there, and it's just a good time on a Tuesday night. So if you're ever looking for something to do, head down to the American Legion. It's on Gallatin Ave over here, on the East Nashville area, and enjoy yourself. So the last thing, of course, is Metro Mayhem. We have something crazy that always happens in Metro. Literally, it feels like almost every day, but obviously, but we're just gonna highlight one thing. So, and this also has some transition music. Metro Mayhem. Metro Mayhem. The car crash at the end might be my favorite thing ever. So, this week, I'm gonna pull up a tweet that was sent out. We've been obviously inundated with the special session, but life goes on, and we're in the middle. We just started early voting for the runoffs for this Metro Council and the mayor's race. So we have obviously the two mayoral candidates. We have people running for 4 at-large council seats, and then we have 3 districted seats that are still getting decided on in this runoff. And we're about 5 days into early voting so far. But the mayor's race obviously is pretty much top of mind. Who's going to be the executive of this city? And this is a city going through a lot of changes, a lot of growth, and this trajectory of the city is very dependent on who occupies the mayoral administrative office. So there have been in the past forums, but after we decided who was going to be in the mayoral runoffs, so Freddie O'Connell, Alice Rowley, they both agreed to do a total of 8 forums, up until the runoff election. And because they decided that early on, it was a combination of many things. It was to keep things straightforward and on schedule, also to not run everybody in the ground trying to go running around to every forum. Some are more lucrative than others. Some aren't live streamed. Some only have 25 people there. So it's very, very obviously campaigns are hard work. And so they kind of just agreed to do 8 of these forums. Well, Alice Rowley did not show up to a forum, the NOAA forum, but of course this was not one of the agreed upon 8 forums, but that didn't stop people from calling her out and not only calling her out, but kind of leaning into this narrative that she skips Black events, of course framing her as, I suppose, averse to listening to Black and brown people, and in the worst case scenario, perhaps even accusing her of being racist or something. So this is something that was tweeted out by Steve Cavendish pointing out Alice Rowley is missing from the NOAA forum. There's a chair on the stage with her name next to it, next to Freddie, which is, I mean, that is just, that picture says all the things that they wanted it to say. In fairness, she did not have the event on her public calendar, so she may have been planning to skip it all along. And the funny thing is, and we can take down the tweet, the funny thing is that some of these narratives during these races, some of these attacks go so far and they're so erroneous that they end up helping the candidates that are getting attacked. I don't know if that's the case with this situation, but we did see local editor-in-chief of the Tennessee Lookout, Holly McCall, come out and basically say, hey, this is a little bit unfair. They agreed to 4 or 8 forums, and this was not one of them. And this is, you know. And then, of course, Alice and Freddie got together on 92Q for a radio interview on Monday, and went right back into this regular scheduled forum. So it just goes to show you that mud is slung, and it seems like there sometimes are no bounds to what kind of mud will be slung around during mayoral / any type of local races here in Nashville, Tennessee. So that was my Metro Mayhem of the week. What an interestingly ridiculous accusation and tweet. But of course, we're looking forward to making it through the rest of, well, I'm looking forward to making it through the rest of this runoff election. I'm ready to know what direction this city is going to go, and who's going to take it, who's going to take the reins. So I'm sure you guys are probably getting to the end of your rope too. But if you need a little bit more help, you haven't gone and voted in the runoffs, you can check out our voter guide on thepamphleteer.co. We laid out, and we'll probably be updating it to only lay out the candidates that remain. But like I said before, there are the mayoral race is still going on. You can still pick 4 countywide council members. Everybody can vote in both of those races if you live in Davidson County. And then there are a couple other races going on that if your district didn't choose a council member, that you would be voting for your council member in this runoff. So anyways, we buzzed right through it. If you guys have any questions, I'll be covering some more of the interesting things that happen during session as I do more research and talk to more experts, especially policy experts, to dive into some of these bills, especially some of the ones that didn't pass, because, you know, usually what doesn't pass this go around, we're probably going to see come back in General Assembly. So I'm going to be looking into that stuff. But if you guys have any questions, always feel free to reach out. Hit me up with questions on Twitter. It's Megan Lee Writes. Yeah. And again, I always enjoy it. I hope to see you guys next week. Bye.